Mexico's on the verge of becoming a failed state. These cartels control 30% of the country, paramilitary, heavy weapons. They're fighting the Mexican army to a standstill. They're shooting down helicopters and aircraft whenever they dare go into Sinaloa or Jalisco territory, controlling huge portions of our borders, pumping fentanyl in massive numbers with the backing of China and with the knowledge of the Chinese Communist Party. So that's proxy hybrid warfare right there.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Congressman Mike Waltz from Florida's 6th Congressional District. You're also the first Green Beret to ever be elected to the House, which is surprising after all this time.
I know, man. We checked with like the parliamentarian, the historians. I keep waiting on some old guy to jump up out of a crowd and say, "You lying son of a bitch! I was, elected in 1962 or whatever." But so far, I'm it. And there's been 5 seals, so I just tell them it takes 5 of them to equal one of us.
Yeah, that's true.
All a day
at a minimum. So let's before we get into the show and everything, let's talk about you a bit. Where did you grow up?
Florida native, grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, 3 Navy bases there, grew up a Navy brat, and then obviously defected and went Army.
What was that like?
What's that?
Growing up as a Navy brat.
Well, I mean, I literally, all we could afford was a piece of property that was probably worth $1, and literally in the flight line of Naval Air Station Jacksonville, and the P3s, which are submarine hunters, would buzz the house about every 15 minutes, rattle the windows, and remind us that the Navy was there, out there hunting for submarines.
Yeah.
But no, it was great. Look, my dad kind of disappeared. So it was just my mother and sister and I, but I was surrounded by good, chiefs and good male father figures. And one of the things that I kind of talk more broadly about is expanding junior ROTC, expanding national service, and getting kids that are often in single family homes those positive role models.
Yeah. It's one thing that gets overlooked a lot, especially during during the whole COVID lockdown bullshit. There are a lot of kids in lower income areas, both in rural America and urban America, who depend on school for food, right? They get their breakfast and lunch every day from the school. And we shut that shit down, Some people for longer than others. You guys were lucky to have a real governor in DeSantis and not some jackass, but I
actually talk about it in the book, not to make it all about the book, but I talk about that story and those decisions he made in the chapter on boldness. And I mean, we were only a month into this thing. I'll never forget a call with him. And he said, "Look, Mike, we're going to follow the data. We don't have a lot yet, but it looks like so far this disproportionately affects the elderly and disproportionately people with comorbidities. So we're going to focus everything we got on our old folks' homes and on folks that have other types of illnesses. It doesn't look like it's affecting kids at all. Maybe gives them a cold." This was like in April of 20. He said, "I'm open. I'm going to close schools for a month. There's only a month left in the school year. I'm reopening them in come August because we're not going to do this to our kids." And the part to your point that always gets lost and pisses me off is the other side of the aisle, is supposed to be for the working class. Well, you know what? If you're a truck driver, if you're a nurse, a maid, a grocery clerk, anybody who has to actually go, a carpenter, or work with their hands, you can't stay home with your kids.
Yeah.
Right? And if you live in rural America, you don't have Wi-Fi half the time. Or if you're an inner city family of 5 kids and you're given one crappy laptop, I mean, the whole thing, I think, set a generation of kids, and often the poorest kids in minority majority neighborhoods, back a generation in terms of their education. And nobody's held accountable. It's total and utter bullshit.
Yeah, it's a big problem. The way that we handle education in the first place is a big problem. Elon's got some pretty interesting ideas about doing away with grades and promoting people based on competency. which I think is probably a good idea. I mean, there might be some social issues there that we have to iron out, but I think it's a good idea. But you know, I don't know if you remember this, but the Chicago Teachers Union in December of 2020 tweeted the following: "The push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny." Gonna have to explain that one to me, bud. I don't know what the fuck that means, to be honest.
Don't ask me to explain it.
Good Lord.
It makes zero sense. And I think the teachers union really showed their true character and their ass, especially Randy Weingartner, through that whole episode. And by the way, where are the literally tens of billions of dollars that they said they would not go back to work? They wouldn't go teach kids until they received all that money. Where'd that money go? And oh, by the way, if you didn't follow one of our committees on the origins of COVID, Fauci finally admitted that the 6 foot, distance, which is the main thing that made schools close, was made up, completely made up. Well, look, at the end of the day, I talk about the story of Ron DeSantis said, "I'm not closing the schools. There's no evidence that this is affecting kids." Unfortunately, my daughter was in the DC schools. They kept theirs closed another year. It just is, anyway, it's sad and it's tragic, and there's zero accountability for it.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible what they did to those kids. And, back to the other point, anytime anything happens, there's always a certain segment of the population that is affected worse by it, and it's typically people with less resources, no matter what type of resources we're talking about, whether they're financial, social, whatever the hell it is, right? But the fact is that there are also high performers and low performers in life, and low performers need guidance and leadership, and they need a little help sometimes, right? Sometimes low performance is a result of the lack of those resources, and we can fix that problem. It's a big issue for me that we're not one, that we don't realize this, because it's taboo. Everybody's always the same forever, or whatever the fuck people believe. But it's a problem for me that we're not developing this standard out to its logical conclusion. Why aren't we training kids to be leaders? One of the reasons is because the institutions we used to use for this, like youth sports and the Boy Scouts and ROTC and all this other stuff, have either been neutered, where everybody's a winner all the time, or they've been infiltrated by fucking weirdos. You know what I mean? And I don't think it's on accident that that's happened. I mean, if you're looking from the outside in, and we've all seen the Yuri Bezmenov tape by now about the Soviet plan to neuter America, basically, and it's working well. But that's a really good way to do it. If you're trying to attack something from within, attack the institutions that make it strong and protect it.
Well, that's what the Marxists call the long march through the institutions, and that's what the neo-Marxists and communist movements decided to do in the 60s. Chris Rufo's done great research on this in his book, America's Cultural Revolution. They decided to stop blowing up, banks and buses and literally attacking things. The FBI put them in jail under J. Edgar Hoover. When they got out of jail, they said, "Well, that sucked. We're going to start the long march to the institutions. We're going to start with academia and then move on to the media and then entertainment and then sports." And the Holy Grail is corporate boards, and they're doing that through ESG, and the military, which they're doing through CRT, through critical race theory. And I've been fighting my entire time in Congress to start unpacking that. We finally got a ban of critical race theory in any type of training, any type of institute in the United States military. But it's going to take a new president, a new commander in chief to get us moving back towards a meritocracy that you have to be. And I tell a story in the book about, talking an argument with the superintendent of the Air Force Academy, who in their orientation slides, brand new cadets, 18 years old, come into the Air Force Academy, and they're being taught, don't say mom and dad, say parent, don't say boyfriend, girlfriend, say partner. Colorblind, the term colorblind was offensive. And I asked the general, I've called in close air support, so a whole lot of combat veterans. We never asked what race, religion, socioeconomic background the pilot is. We just want bombs on foreheads. And Chinese fighter pilots won't care either. They just care you're American or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is a fight. They have infiltrated for many years, and it's going to be a fight to unpack that.
Isn't it odd, you know, like for I assume most of these people went to school, which probably means they read Brave New World, right? Where Aldous Huxley intentionally, removes words like mother and father and replaces them with crash and crash, for example, in that book.
Yeah.
And then you see 1984, something similar, right? Like Newspeak, I believe it's called in that book.
Yeah, that's right. And the language and how much the language and the words matter. You're right.
This is a first principles matter, and it's why I think you mentioned it on Drinking Bros the other day, actually. But we need to really hammer down on first principles in our education system, especially ones that deal with fundamental human rights, like the freedom of speech, for example. Why is it important? Because people hear free speech and like, well, I don't like what that guy said, so fuck him or whatever, right? And it's easy as a human being to be emotional and think that way. But the reason that we value free speech is because speech is thought, right? That's what it is. Saying things out loud is thinking. And when you police speech, what you're effectively doing is policing people's thoughts. And that cannot ever happen. And the fact that people don't make that connection, despite all the literature to that effect, not just fiction, but nonfiction literature as well. Books like, The Rights of Man, for example, or anything that Jefferson ever wrote, or
Right.
A textbook called The Preceptor from the middle part of the 18th century is the book that most of the founders used to, as a reference point to write all the documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, all that stuff. People just don't have a connection with that anymore in our society. It's all right. I mean, it was intentionally done. The federal government to some degree, and then state governments control what you have to learn to get out of high school. And the fact that they removed civics in a big way from that is not.
That's what I was going to go
not an
to.
accident.
Polling shows a majority of 18 to 25-year-olds can't name the three branches of government, right? I mean, heck, AOC, after getting elected, messed it up. She said the House, the Senate, and the presidency, right? So, but yet 60% would just self-describe themselves as some type of activist. So they're an activist, but have no idea even the very basics of the three branches of government. We got a long way to go, but not to kind of pound on my legislation, but I think expanding junior ROTC by 30% and getting those life skills and getting that discipline and leadership and teamwork, even if they don't join after that, you get a better citizen out of it. And it's at the cost of literally 2 instructors per high school. So it's the return on investment, I think, is just off the charts.
Yeah, and
it's a step. It's necessary, not sufficient. But
right.
It's a step.
Yeah. I mean, so some of those people are employees of the schools, and some of them are on loan from the federal government or even state government. So some of the ROTC instructors might be Air Guard or National Guard or something, and that's their last duty assignment before they retire, is to go train kids at a high school or something like that, right?
Oftentimes they're retired. We just changed the rule. I changed the rules to get. You only had to have served 10 years and could have just gotten out. To me, that gets somebody a little bit younger and often a little more relevant to that age group, but also what's going on in the world. And we needed to expand the pool. One of the limiting factors was we didn't have enough people willing to do it. And so it's half the cost is paid by the Pentagon and half the cost is paid by the local school system. But we actually have a waiting list of schools wanting programs, and most of them on the waiting list are in majority areas. So I'm listening to the Army and the Air Force and the Navy saying, well, we're having a hard time recruiting minorities, but yet I'm pointing to all of these, majority high schools that are on their ROTC waiting list. I'm like, guys, so it's that kind of stuff on the Armed Services Committee where I've got to kick them in the rear end sometimes to connect the dots and put the funding in the right place.
Yeah, well, there's something about this new era of politics and leadership, even corporate leadership, that is so risk averse. I don't know how they find the doorknob to let themselves out of the house in the morning, to be honest, without looking around and making sure nobody's watching what they're doing. It's like what you just said about going into these communities and recruiting people, not just for the military, but to give them the skills they need to have a better life, is really what's happening there. Because most people that were in the military will tell you that improved their life to a great degree. This is the same thing that American
to your point, being able to fire off a claymore isn't what's marketable. It's right place, right time, right uniform, bottoms up leadership, understanding commander's intent and accomplishing a mission oriented, right? So it's all those intangibles that you're taught. And again, I don't care if, I want you to join and go serve, but even if you're learning those life skills in 9th, 10th grade, and we've got some civics laid on top of it and a little, actual objective history in terms of, yes, this country isn't perfect, but look what it's done for other societies, including our former enemies like Germany and Japan around the world. Hell yeah. And the cost of the Pentagon is half of 2, annual salaries. To me, it's just an absolute no-brainer, but I've had to push them to do it. But we're getting there.
Yeah, and then another big part of that is I think there's some apprehension about going into minority neighborhoods to have these conversations. I don't know why people are so afraid of other people. It's the most bizarre shit of all time. I know in the military, nobody gives a fuck. We just say weird shit to each other all the time. And as long as you can carry my big ass out of a ditch, if I get blown up, then I'm good. I don't give a fuck what you're doing. But it's like before, most, especially on the Republican side, they have been terrified over the last 30 or 40 years of reaching out into the black community, for example. And then Trump comes along. He doesn't give a fuck about anything, right? He doesn't care what people think of him. He doesn't care if what he says sounds weird or whatever the fuck. And he just he's like, hey, I'm going to do stuff for you guys. And then he actually did it for the first time. Yeah. I don't remember any period. Well, I know that he created the lowest unemployment for black men in the history of this country. Well, since we've been tracking that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you did minority opportunity zones to actually put incentives in place to attract capital investment into those minority-owned businesses. He was the first, not Obama, not Clinton. He was the first president to put permanent funding in place for historically black colleges. He actually got justice reform done. You remember, Biden holding up his vial of crack from the 1994 crime bill, 3 strikes you're out. President Trump got that done too, and I think it's why you're seeing a lot of African American men saying, "Hey, my wallet was fuller, our neighborhoods were safer, the world wasn't on fire," and giving him a hard look.
Yeah, and then this is how you're dealing with dishonest people and frankly losers. The policy conversation never really happens. It's like Trump's evil, Trump's racist, and then whatever substance they have for that is of no consequence, right? I think you got into an argument with Berman on CNN earlier this week about this shit. It's like it's like talking to children sometimes. Like,
so they wanted to equate the language, the rhetoric of telling the world and telling the country that Trump's the next Hitler, he's a fascist, and he's going to come steal all your freedoms and be America's first dictator. Well, what does that translate? That translates clearly in at least 2 people's minds: the ends justify the means. Stop him at all costs, even if it means killing him. And they want to. Berman's trying to equate that with us. And me included, saying Kamala's ideas are rooted in socialism, and that those are moral equivalents. She introduced price controls as her first economic measure. That's a political philosophy, but that doesn't come with she's going to be the next dictator and therefore has got to die. It just is. It's just ridiculous on the face of it. So the Iranians are literally trying to kill him as we speak, a leading presidential candidate, a party nominee and former president. But yet we had to talk about that nonsense.
Yeah, man, any student of history or somebody who's been paying attention to politics for the last 30 years would know that price controls are a roadmap to hyperinflation. It always happens, right? It happened with Diocletian in the 4th century in Rome, and it happened with pretty much every South and Central American country over the past 40 years.
Dan, so think about the irony. She was charged to be the border czar, and they're trying to deny that now, to get at the root causes. Well, what's the number one country where people are fleeing right now? It's Venezuela. Why? Because of socialist price controls that have destroyed what once was a thriving economy, yet that's what she introduces. I mean, it would be laughable if it weren't so serious.
Yeah, it would be. And now, I mean, this week, there's apparently a couple of apartment complexes have been taken over by a Tren de Aragua in San Antonio now. You wouldn't think that would happen, but their liberal governor or a liberal sheriff was on at the DNC convention running his suckhole about this and that. I mean, I think we live in the dumbest period in all of human history, to be honest. You've got all the information you could ever want. You have immediate access to it, and not just to somebody's book that they wrote, but live interviews where they say things. They get asked questions and they respond to them immediately. And still people are like, she doesn't really mean that. She doesn't really mean that we should get gender reassignment surgery for every felon in federal prison. Are you
take away your private insurance or decriminalize illegal immigrants or, turning on, she's even flip-flopped on plastic straws. I mean, but to your point on, on South Central America and on Tren de Aragua, or as Trump says, Aragua, is my new favorite term from him. Like, Green Berets were in Colombia in very small numbers. You remember the Medellin cartels bombing airliners, almost took over the country, turned into a total narco state. Green Berets were down there, not pulling triggers, not in combat, but just working by, with, and through the Colombians, and we took down those cartels. And we took down the FARC narco guerrillas at the same time literally, talk about return on investment. We know how to take these cartels down. We could take the Mexican cartels down. I just don't know that people realize that Mexico is on the verge of becoming a failed state. These cartels control 30% of the country, paramilitary, heavy weapons. They're fighting the Mexican army to a standstill. They're shooting down helicopters and aircraft whenever they dare go into Sinaloa or Jalisco territory, controlling huge portions of our borders, pumping fentanyl in massive numbers with the backing of China and with the knowledge of the Chinese Communist Party. So that's proxy hybrid warfare right there. And all we have to do, and I'm not espousing what the media likes to spin it, Waltz or Trump or whomever wants to send the Marines into Mexico City again. I'm talking offensive cyber, go after the money, use space assets to support law enforcement, get NSA fully engaged. And you know what? If the leaders of the cartels are a little bit worried about where they're sleeping at night, I'm okay with that too. I'm not saying, we're putting drones over Mexico City, but I want them afraid that we are. We know how to put them on their back foot, and we know how to disassemble and start jamming these guys up. Yeah,
I mean, we were doing it pretty well for a while, using military advisors and some other stuff to fight, especially FARC. Like there was a big problem with those guys for a while, so we beat them up pretty good, and then they started doing business with Hezbollah for a while, right? Hezbollah and other Iranian cutouts were moving a lot of money through South American cartels, and then finally, I believe the Colombian government made a deal with them, a ceasefire deal with them, and it's kind of gone quiet now. But Mexico's fucked. I mean, look. 85.
But they couldn't make that ceasefire deal with the FARC until they were in a position of strength. Right. Yeah. I mean, they kicked the snot out of them. They infiltrated them. They had an amnesty program to cause some of them to defect. Right. It's all these counterinsurgency kind of tools in the toolkit, and much more of them are economic and diplomatic and intelligence based. I talk about them in the book. I mean, this is kind of the attributes of think and lead like a Green Beret. It's not always about sending another Marine division or tens of thousands of U.S. forces. And that's too often, way too often, the default response to the Pentagon. Throw more billions, throw more hardware, throw more people at a problem rather than adapting, thinking unconventionally, and using all the tools in our toolkit.
Yeah, I mean it's very dumb the way that we handle it. But now we've got a problem, right? It isn't about this isn't the war on drugs in the 80s and 90s, which I thought was, well, drugs won, to be clear, right? Like what we're trying to get rid of is violence. And why do you want to get rid of violence? One, because it interrupts a lot of the things that we do in life. Like a general feeling of safety just is better for everybody. But the real reason is because people die. People get hurt and people die. Right now, 85,000 to 110,000 people are dying of fentanyl overdoses every year because of these cartels. Like, it's really because of China, but it's the cartels of the throughput, right? And
that's right.
Like we built the best military of all time, and we've got operators and gunfighters out here that are seasoned, right? What the fuck are we doing? Kill all of these people. If it doesn't matter what action you're taking, if the actions you're taking are resulting in tens of thousands of Americans dying, you have to die. That's it.
Yep. Yeah, look, I mean, and even so there's that kind of kinetic piece, but to channel the title of the book there, the hard truth is we could shut it down economically. You start putting sanctions on these Chinese precursor manufacturers, you start interdicting their flows. We know that they know when they go to certain ports in Mexico exactly what it's being used for. They try to hide behind, these are just common commercially available chemicals that you could wash your, house with. No, we know that they know. We know the companies that are doing it. We know they're doing it in the direction of Chinese intelligence because it is proxy. It's proxy warfare. They're not only killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, you're gutting our inner cities and you're gutting the next generation. And the cartels are just a proxy force to do that. But you start clamping down on their money before it even leaves the Chinese mainland, then you're starting to get at the root of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, this is, by the way, and a very misunderstood and also quite a bit of misinformation about what the fuck it actually is. But this is the power of tariffs internationally. If Trump is president, he gets on the phone and he tells Xi Jinping, if I see one more fentanyl pill come across this border, I'm putting 100% tariff on every Chinese good, period. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you it stops then, right? Because Xi Jinping is not stupid.
As he did in the last administration, you don't stop buying Iranian oil tomorrow, you can't buy ours because they buy a lot of our gas. And guess what they did? And Iran was on their back foot. And we had reporting from Hezbollah, from Hamas, from the Houthis, of all their leadership complaining that they were out of cash, that the payments had stopped coming from Tehran. They couldn't pay their fighters were defecting. It's all about the money. And as long as Iran is flush with cash and it's flush with Chinese cash, in that matter, and you're absolutely right. You don't buy a drop of our gas as long as you're buying theirs, and it's shut down real fast. And that ripple effect caused stability in the Middle East. Iran was on its back foot. Its currency was tanking. It couldn't export anymore. And lo and behold, we're signing peace deals on the White House lawn that any other president would have gotten 3 Nobel Peace Prizes.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I mean, right? Obama got one a day in, I think, for doing nothing. Just for getting elected.
I think it was a couple of hours in. I think it was already pre-baked.
Yeah. I mean, and we've got quite a bit of leverage, and I think it betrays the fact that our State Department is just full of absolute cowards, in my opinion. Cowards and incompetent people. So we have, in Spruce Pines, North Carolina, is not the largest, but a very large quartz mine. And the thing that's unique about it is it is the purest form of quartz on Earth, and it is in every computer chip, everything we're using right now to make this show happen. There's some of that quartz from Spruce Pines, North Carolina in it. And the reason it's so valuable is because it narrows down the time of refinement by like 100%. I don't know. It just brings it way, way down. Saves tons and tons of money. That's another thing. We just tell China, hey, you don't have access to this anymore until you stop acting like assholes. And to the ripple effect thing, the fact that Trump got no love for the Abraham Accord.
And I just want to throw one other out there I think you'll appreciate this quick story. I had I don't know if you're familiar with antimony, but you can't make ammo without the critical mineral antimony. The Defense Logistics Agency, headed by a 3-star, comes to our committee. They're pulling their hair out because they need more money because of the higher cost of ammo, and every shooter out there knows the cost of ammo is going through the roof. But we start digging, and it turns out that a huge part of the problem was the Chinese were withholding shipments of antimony. The only place in the world that is mined and refined now is Tajikistan, Russia, and China. Kind of a problem. Like the entire Defense Department, all of America can't have ammo without these supplies of antimony. So I go back to DLA. Okay, this is a crisis. What's the plan? Oh, well, we were working with the State Department, and they're going to send a demarche, which is a strongly worded letter, to ask the Chinese why they're withholding shipments. I said, no. How about until we can get our mines back open, which is a whole other story. There's been 5 in Idaho that have gone out of business because of environmental regulatory crap. But I had to force them to start stockpiling antimony in a warehouse so that if the Chinese completely cut it off, that we could still make ammo in America. And it, just for what you just said with the quartz, at least we have a mine in North Carolina. A lot of these minerals, about 80% of them, all our mines have gone out of business, or the Chinese have bought them up in South Central America where we had ready access to them. And they could cut off our entire economy by cutting off these minerals.
Not just South and Central America, North America as well. They bought some Canadian mines that are antimony producers as well. I mean, what the fuck?
And lithium.
Yeah.
Canada's largest lithium mine, Trudeau let the Chinese state-owned enterprise. So it wasn't even like they were hiding behind some other company. Yeah. They were supposed to notify our Justice Department. They said they did, and Biden okayed it.
Yeah, so, well, who knows?
Yeah,
maybe he did.
Run with it.
Maybe he woke up for 10 minutes. Or
a hunter signed off on it.
Yeah. Who knows what they gave him for that? Yeah, it's. I mean, this is all like the unique thing about America, and the thing that made us truly powerful, in my opinion, is just geography, right? We don't need any. We have 3,000 miles of standoff on both sides of our border, and then we have the ability, like most countries don't, to be completely self-sustaining. There's not one element on Earth that we can't mine in our own country. We've got. We only have about 1/3 of the antimony that China does, at least that we've discovered so far. But that's fine, right? Like we'll make it work. We'll make it work. China's a big country too.
And even when we don't have here, we've got the Western Hemisphere, right? I mean, all the food, all the minerals, all the energy that we need. We just don't even pay attention to our own backyard. It's infuriating. And as we bring those supply chains back home, hey, here's an idea for the border czar. Of course, we want to bring those supply chains into the United States, but if it doesn't make business sense here, let's incentivize it to go into Central America. I mean, whether it's a T-shirt factory or what have you, and now you're creating jobs down there to get at the migration problem, and we have access to the supply chain. So how about that for a root cause?
I've been bitching about that for years, to be honest.
She just threw $4 billion at it, and anybody who's worked down there knows between the government and the cartels, they take 30 to 40% off the top. Do the math on how we're actually enriching them, escalating, the circle of violence and making the migration problem even worse with our own damn money.
I really don't understand it, to be honest. I mean, the obvious and most logical and probably the easiest solution is to invest in Chilean and Peruvian lithium mines, cobalt mines, et cetera, and create a supply chain north, right? Yeah. Where there's refinement in Mexico and Central America, so now they have economies. They don't have to come here anymore. They don't want to come here. They want to stay around their family and make money and not get murdered by cartels. You know what I mean? The vast majority, before recently, where all these people have just been paroled into the country, the vast majority of Mexican people, especially that were coming to the U.S., would come here for a couple of years and then leave. Right? That was the most common pathway. Now they just stay here because it's so fucked up down there. But why? I mean, how? If you went from mining to refinement to assembly as you go north, then we don't have to do. We can do what Monroe wanted us to do, which is to be a hegemon of North and South America and not really pay too much attention to Europe.
You're also addressing another problem. I just introduced. It's called the Ship Act. We used to have 300 shipyards in the United States. We're down to 20. The Chinese have gobbled up the whole market. They've got 7. These, I'm talking like tankers, cargo ships, the things that make world trade go. The Chinese have 7,000 now under flag. We have less than 200. So again, if they wanted to make it go stop, and they tell those ships to stop going to U.S. ports, which, oh, by the way, are being offloaded by Chinese-made cranes on Chinese-made software. But you're right. We get those supply chains here, at least in the Western Hemisphere, if not in the United States. We're starting to get at that problem too, because rebuilding a national shipbuilding industry, the steel, the aluminum, the workers, the welders, the yards is not going to be an overnight process. But we've got to get started. But this is a multifaceted problem. But this White House truly just has no clue.
Yeah, I've never. To be honest, we've talked about this before on the show quite a bit. But this might be the most incompetent group of cabinet secretaries in the history of this country. I mean, if you think about the people in place now, top of the food chain is Mayorkas, because DHS is in control of 22 agencies, right? And think about what he's in control of. The Secret Service, it's been, not great in a lot of ways with the DEI bullshit over there. Forget about the Trump thing, just like the way that they've recruited. He's in charge of the border and immigration at the same time. It's like, man, you can't get much worse than that. And then you look at Mayor Pete over there, and he's completely incompetent. He was on paternity leave during the biggest global shipping crisis in the history of human beings. He was on fucking leave for that. Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind with this guy?
Well, then, you got Sullivan, the national security advisor, and Blinken. I swear they wake up every morning and just thinking about, geez, what concession can I think of to give today? How can I appease just a little bit better? And maybe the bad guys will be nice back. They're the kids that, just kept taking more money to the schoolyard to give to the bully. If I just give them a little bit more and throw in my fruit roll up and maybe my ham sandwich too, then finally they'll leave me alone. And we all know how well that's gone.
Yeah, well, this is what happens when you don't have a real leader. You know what I mean?
Well, but they've also been, in some position of foreign policy authority now for 12 out of the last 16 years. And even the 4 years of Trump, you had John Kerry running around undermining him.
Yeah.
In violation of the Logan Act, I argue. But so, you from the Iran deal to the Afghanistan withdrawal, damn near World War III on the European continent for the first time in 80 years. Look at those. Look at those academics and how well that's working out.
They're doing great. Again, it's a result of not bad leadership, but no leadership. Because a leader, the president doesn't have to be an expert on all the things, just like a CEO of a company. Like I can tell you right now that Steve Jobs wasn't programming iPhones. Not one, as a matter of fact. But he was, creative and a good manager to some degree, and he was good at marketing. The president has the tools in his toolkit that he has. This is probably true for a military commander as well. You've got diplomacy and you've got that other option, right? And if you show yourself to be unwilling to use that other option, diplomacy is fucking pointless. It's like throwing a changeup without having a fastball. Nobody cares, and but we're seeing that now, and they're doing it intentionally. A lot of people don't know this, and I still can't understand what the fuck they were thinking. But the Afghanistan withdrawal was a State Department operation. Why?
Yep.
Why would a drawdown from a military deployment that lasted 25 years?
Because they went to the NEO playbook, right? The non-combatant evacuation operation. Obviously, you and I and everybody else out there with common sense knows this isn't like with pulling the embassy out of Liberia or Tanzania. This was a full-on combat zone, doing it while in contact, and they just were lost in the sauce. And we've got that now. And I was heavily involved in the investigation of the withdrawal. We finally got to the generals to the table to say that essentially they waited and waited and waited. And by the way, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was in Martha's Vineyard the night before Kabul fell, to let you know how much his head was in the game. They believe they can just cut a deal with the Taliban and kind of keep the embassy going, keep a few troops there, keep, processing the SIV visas, and no big deal. I mean, that was the operating assumption. So they just told the military to get out. And we'll leave Americans there. We'll leave our allies there, and kumbaya, right? We'll link pinkies with the likes of the Haqqani and Siraj. Anyway, the whole thing just totally infuriated.
Well, did you guys ever?
I talked to a veteran, these groups who are still keeping their guys alive. One of the chapters in my book's about loyalty and the bond you build when you're embedded with these units, the trust that you have to have. He's exhausted his entire savings and both of his kids' 529 plans, keeping his Afghans alive because he just can't turn off his phone and abandon them. But that's something the likes of, Sullivan and Blinken just could never understand.
Well, did you get any answer from any of these people about why we abandoned Bagram Air Base and then lied to the Afghans about it before we even got our people out? I mean, that's forget even as a State Department operation, a normal human being knows that you don't abandon air superiority before you get your people out. That's dumb, right? That's the last thing that you pull out.
Yeah, I mean, my teenage daughter at the time was asking, like, why would we take our military out before our civilians and our people in a war zone? But I'll tell you, they gave the general in charge. I'll never forget sitting down with him, McKenzie, in charge of CENTCOM, and he said, if Biden gives me the order, I'm getting everybody out as fast as possible. I said, well, what do you mean by everybody? He said, all uniforms. We are out of there. Because a withdrawal is one of the most dangerous military operations. Said, okay, but General, what about CIA? What about our partner forces that the Taliban are going to turn on and torture and execute? What about Americans that are there? What about our allies? What about our embassy? Nope, just single-minded, out the door. And that was the total, utter lack of planning or any strategic thought that was going on until it all blew up in their face. And then they were in scramble mode, and we've got 13 dead because they weren't at Bagram. They were at an airport that sits in the middle of 4 million people at Kabul International.
Yeah, I mean, that would be like piling everybody up in Sadr City and then evacuating them all at the same time. What the fuck?
Leave the gates open so we can evacuate, but guard the gates.
Yeah, I mean it's insane. Well, I mean, it's all just, as I said before, a symptom of a complete lack of leadership. And the reason we don't have leadership is because we're running out of leaders. And that's what the book is about. Hard truths, think and lead like a Green Beret. It's out soon, I think next week, right? The 22nd?
It's out for pre-order now. Yeah, it's out in stores next week. But you can order at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and none of the royalties are going to come to me. They'll go to the Matthew Pacino Foundation, one of my Green Berets that I didn't bring home. So we give the SEALs crap all the time about all their books and movies. I actually want veterans to get their stories out there. With less than 1% of Americans serving, capture your story, capture it for history, but capture it for fellow Americans. But in my case, I'm going to, not make any money off of it and give it to the families who suffered.
Well, I know you got to get out of here soon, but tell me what's in the book.
So it captures what is unique about Green Berets in the sense that, the SEALs and the Rangers, best in the world, the Osama bin Laden raid, 2 bullets in the forehead, middle of the night, and get everybody out. Right? That targeted commando military raid. Green Berets are different in that we have to specialize in regions of the world. It's just a few of us at any one time, and we learn local languages, blend in with local militias in Africa and Asia, around the world, the Middle East. In one of my tours, I tell people how it was just 3 of us, 3 Green Berets partnered with 90 Arabs in their task force, partnered with 180 Afghans. So, if I never eat goat again, I'm good. We're often very alone and very afraid. But it also takes a very different mindset to be that autonomous, as close as I'll ever get to Lawrence of Arabia. You have to truly understand strategic intent. You're a warrior diplomat on the ground, and you're using soft power as much as you're using hard power. You don't have any authority over these warlords. Hell, half of them soon kill you as they would the bad guys. So it's by with and through, it's influence, it's strategic communications, and I, in each chapter I tell a story of what we learned on the ground in terms of restraint, discipline, resilience, in different scenarios and situations, but then how I'm applying it to the tribes of Washington, D.C. And some days I think the tribes of Afghanistan are easier than the tribes in the swamp. Building those coalitions and achieving a mission.
Yeah. I mean, it's useful information whether you're, trying to organize your family or your community or a business or a military unit or anything. It doesn't matter what it is. These principles stay the same. That's why the phrase paramilitary exists, because people take the lessons learned from the most extreme situations that have happened to human beings and they apply them to the everyday world. Right.
That's right.
It's just that's the way it works. That's the way life works,
Well, thank you, Dan, for letting me talk about it, man, and thank you for what you guys are doing to look. I'm a big advocate of getting veterans engaged. I tell my VFW halls all the time: just because you went downrange and came back doesn't mean you get to sit around and drink. Get engaged in your community, in your church, run for office, county commissioner, state rep, Congress. But those, that ethos of mission focus, leadership, discipline, followership, we're willing to die for that flag, then we can roll up our sleeves and make our country better.
100%.
And I think communicating those traits and attributes is incredibly important. So thank you, man.
Yes, sir. And thank you for coming. Appreciate the time. Everybody go check out the book, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret, from Congressman Mike Waltz. Again, thank you for your time, and thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.